Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. This is the last stop of like a little tour that I've been doing. So I flew in from Berlin yesterday, and it's nice to be back on home soil. I'm going to talk today about the idea of making space and a little bit about my journey and a little bit about the process of writing and the sort of intricacies of the industry that don't always come towards you at the beginning of the journey. But I'll start off talking a bit about myself. So I am 27. I was born in London to Ghanaian parents who came to the UK when they were very young and came and made a home for themselves. I come from a really big family. So my mum is one of 10, my dad is one of 8. And that means that when you have family gatherings and you have family reunions, it's like people just like fighting for space, literally, to speak, which is really wonderful. And I guess it was the sort of earliest instance of storytelling, of like being able to sit and listen and respond in a way that wasn't just wasn't just saying something that you'd already like pre-designated, but responding to what someone had said. I think those early years, like sort of, I have these real early memories of being in Ghana. The last time I went was about 15 years ago for my grandma's 80th birthday. And we would sit in the kitchen, my grandma would sit on a stool, and all of my mum's siblings and my mum would just kind of like gather around and sit and talk and laugh and just kind of go back and forth. And it was just like this very special kind of oral storytelling, which has permeated all of my work. I also grew up a really big reader. If I wasn't dragging my mum to Waterstones or Dodsworth Smith, I was in the library. Our school used to have this like very tiny library that was like, I don't know, just like a real cupboard room. And at 8 years old, I asked my mum if we could write to the local council so that we get more books, because I was just bored. Like I'd just been reading and reading and reading. But I'm really grateful because it felt like it just opened up all of these worlds that I wasn't privy to really young, and kind of set me up for what I do now. I also really engaged with a lot of other different art forms as I was growing up. The cinema was a big thing. Like I'd go to the cinema with my mum every week on a Friday. We would usually, like for 3 weeks, we'd just watch the same thing because things weren't rotating quickly enough. But it was really nice to be in a dark room amongst strangers and to really just kind of be present. I think that's something which I'll get onto later, but something that's really part of my process, this idea of being as present as possible. And actually, the first thing I did when I got here yesterday was go to the cinema, which was really lovely. I'm a photographer as well, and images play a really big part in my work. I grew up with these like really thick, like physical photo albums that would mark a trip or would mark the closing of a year, and would watch as my parents or an auntie or an uncle would be like almost in a way like assemble this story that had occurred, assemble a story of a family reunion, or assemble a story of a couple of years gone past. And these are things which like I can still hold on to today. I remember being 10, 11 and always wanting to hold on to the family camera because it was an opportunity for me to be like, this is what I can see. And a real like opportunity to archive that and to document that, which I think is really special. I also grew up playing music. Like I played the violin for 10 years and I was really obsessed with jazz, but I had cousins who would slip me CDs and cassettes of music I probably wasn't supposed to be listening to, like really young. A lot of hip hop, a lot of rap. Like I remember listening to Dizzy Rascal when I was like 8 years old and being like young black, and hearing Dizzy Rascal like put out this album at 16, which was just like, it's some of the best writing that I've ever heard. Was really special, but also totally inappropriate at 8 years old. I guess like for me, when I'm listening to music, it's the same with literature, it's the same with images, it's the same with moving images. I'm always really concerned with going past what it is that you initially see or hear and going more towards the feeling. Like I'm really interested in how artists and art can not only say something but also conjure a mood and an atmosphere that you can really feel. I realised I've just like skipped a huge chunk in this. It's like, oh, I was at university suddenly. But I think my like teenage years were just spent either in the library or playing basketball. I played a lot of basketball, which the height kind of suggests. But when I got to university was the first sort of time that I really realised that I wanted to write. Like I had this pull towards writing, towards documentation, towards wanting to express something of myself. Most of my student loan was spent just on books, and I went to university in Coventry, and there was a small Waterstones there, but there was a much bigger one in Birmingham, so I would catch a train, which was like a 20-minute journey. And I'd walk around Birmingham for like 45 minutes, kind of kidding myself that I was doing anything else but there to buy books. And then I'd go and like spend like, yeah, just a decent chunk. But that was when I discovered these writers who were so formative of the work that I do today. Zadie Smith and Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. There's a James Baldwin essay which comes in book form that I read at 18 and literally changed my life. Like I read it every year. It's called The Fire Next Time. And it's just so clear. Like I remember reading this prose, and I grew up in the church and around religion and around faith, and it was so intriguing to see and read someone who is tussling with a very similar upbringing and also wanting to express that quite deep feeling of essentially tussling with your existence, which I thought was really intriguing. The same with Zadie Smith. I think that I grew up in Southeast London and she grew up in Northwest London, and it was the first time that I'd read an account of a very particular area of the world that spoke to not only who I was but who we might be as well. The work is quite experimental, but it felt like in that experimentation it just really opened up the space for possibilities. And so yeah, a lot of books. I remember going back from Coventry to London and having to pack like 2 suitcases in order to fit all of the books, most of which have been donated to the library now because there is just no space. In my first year, I lived in halls in Coventry outside what was the biggest club in Coventry. My window literally would open up into the back of the smoking area. And so around 7 p.m, all I could hear was like this really like thunderous bass just going like doom, doom. And after a week of little to no sleep, including this instance where I'd complained and the owner of the club came into my room at 2 a.m. Like he just knocked on the door and came with one of those like little dictaphones and measured the sound in there. And he was like, yeah, this sounds about normal conversation level. And I looked at him and I was like, it's 2 a.m, like I need to sleep. But after a couple of weeks of this, I just thought I need to find some sense of stability, some rhythm. And I realized that the library was 5 or so minute walk away. So every evening, like 6, 7 p.m, I would head to the library and I would just read and I would write. And I would just kind of be in a space where not only was I actively doing things, but I was also just making the space for myself to think and feel and to work through various notions of like what I was thinking and feeling about the world. And I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for that club because it like put me in a space where I can make space for myself, which I think so much of my work is not just in the thinking and the feeling, but it's also in the making space to do so. And there's a real freedom, I think, to that space that you make, even if it is 10 minutes at the start of your day or, like a regular sort of half an hour thing on your lunch breaks. It's like that space is really crucial, I think. So I moved back to London after university, I grew up in London, but going from Coventry, which is super quiet, back to London was a real shock to my system. And I spent a decent chunk of time just really trying to work out what it is that I wanted to do, as I feel like most people are in that position when they graduate. But for me, like, it just kept coming back to, I want to write, like, I want to use this form of expression to express myself. And I had no real idea of how one does that professionally, but I was just so sure about it. And so I worked in a shop, I worked part-time in a shop, and really allowed myself the time and space to work on my craft. Like, it felt like what I was doing, like I was writing most days, and if not, I was just reading and researching. And it felt like this very private and quite, almost like quite spiritual act, in that, like, I would always return to the page at the same time, usually on my lunch break if it was afforded, but in the mornings or in the evenings when I came back from work. And there was this routine that was developed, and the more I was doing it, the more I was like, I love doing this thing. Like, I don't actually mind at the moment not having work in the public domain, because this work that I'm doing really brings me a sense of joy. There's a real pleasure to it. And so that period of my life was, I always think about it, and actually in the process of preparing this speech, I went through my hard drive and looked at all of the old work that I had dating back to, 2015, and some of it is really terrible, but it was like, at the time, it was a place where I was like, okay, here's some freedom here. Here is the space for you to say, this is how I feel, this is who I am, this is what I'm going towards. I think coming back to London was really useful for me, and it would have been the same going anywhere, but I found this community of people in the spaces that were also trying to occupy similar sort of spaces, like artists and musicians, but also people that I was working with, people who were working in offices. It's so intriguing when you meet people who are like, I too am looking for a place to express myself, and this is the forum for it, whether it was writing or it was filmmaking or it was photography. Because I think everyone, in a way, is looking for space to express themselves, however that may come. And that, yeah, for me, that community of people, even if it's fleeting, even if it is like a singular meeting, and you kind of bump into someone and you have a 10-minute chat, or you like forge a relationship that might last a lifetime. The people that you meet, I think are just they're so important to the journey that you're taking. Let's talk rejection. So I met my literary agent in May of 2019, but I had been trying to find a literary agent since May of 2015. I think when I had first started the process of querying and submitting work, I don't know that my work was quite there, but I think there came a time, perhaps in 2018 or so, and I not only was really enjoying my work, but I could also feel that there was some merit to it. I could also feel that it wasn't just the standard of it, but I really felt like I was approaching this very honest expression of myself, which is, for me, that's really what I'm always aiming for. I think that coming from a photography background, there's always this idea of truth and what you can actually see, and how when you look at an image, there are multiple truths that exist, because we'll always come to it through the lens that we're looking at. But honesty is a very different thing. Like, if I come to you and I say, this is honestly what I can see, I can't really fault that. And so, yeah, midway through 2018, I was very actively submitting to literary agents, and I was coming up against just myriad of responses, from complete silence to a response that indicated that I could write, but there was no space for me in the market. And I think writing is this very strange, like most forms of expression and most media, it occupies a very strange position, because it sits between art and commerce. And more often than not, your agent or an agent is more focused on this idea of commercial viability. But I will say that when, I don't know, meeting my literary agent, which I'll get onto, was for me like a real example that there are people out there willing to sort of champion voices when they come, and they come honestly, and they come with real intention. And so I met my literary agent when I was literally at the end of my tether. Like, I was in my partner's kitchen, and I was just like, I was very much like, I have submitted to like 40 something agents, and I'm at the point where I don't know what the next move or the next step is. But I need something to shift. I need something to change. And it's very difficult to kind of, for me, like, I'm always like really aware of my position as a writer, as an artist, and that's a place where I'm not working towards a means to an end, but I'm more in the process of lifelong discovery. And so there's always places that my work can go and go. But at the time, and I think this is really crucial, that sometimes you actually just really need to trust your gut. And at the time, my gut was telling me that we're here now. Like, we need to like make this next step. And that day I submitted to, on my partner's advice, I submitted to one more literary agent. She was like, submit to one agent today, and then we'll do another one tomorrow, and we'll do another one tomorrow, and you keep going. And that day, my now literary agent responded to me after a couple of hours, and she was really intrigued with my work, and we met the next day, and she immediately offered me representation, which was, a very special and quite emotional moment. Like, I felt like I'd been on this journey, and I was now starting another leg of it. And I think that, it's really important to kind of acknowledge the small successes. And for me, that felt like a form of success that's not that I was guaranteed to put work out, but that someone might champion my work felt really important to me. So when I met my literary agent, I came to her with a collection of non-fiction essays, like 20 of them or so. And I'd been writing them for the year and a half prior. And I was writing about photography and ways of seeing and thinking about like the sort of internal rhythms that we have as people, and how those things are expressed. But I was also really intrigued with this idea of love, and love as a site of freedom, and wondering what happens when you love something or someone, and what happens when you fail to express that, either in like the kind of grander gestures or more in your day-to-day. And my agent was the one who was like, I think that you should write a novel. I think that you have the voice for a novel. So I started writing this novel, and something that I haven't put on the slides is that I wrote this novel very quickly. Like, I wrote it over the course of 4 or 5 months, so over the course of that summer. But after about a month and a half, I thought I had something close to a very solid draft. Like, I had been writing like every day, and I was in a really good place, and like I felt like the pace and the rhythm was really working. And so I'd made this, like, in my head I had this grand plan. I was going on holiday at the end of June, and I said to my agent, I was like, I'll have the time and space to just take some time away. I will send you the draft. You give me like whatever notes, and then when I come back, we'll keep working on it. And so I went away on holiday, and I just kind of put it out of my head, and I was like, everything's good, everything's great. And then I came back, and my agent called me, and she was like, so this draft is not quite working. I need you to start again. And that was like, as you can see, a very, very interesting moment for me, because I felt I had really like poured something into the work, and to be told that it's not quite there at the time it was a very intense feeling. I don't like, the edges of it were all wrapped up in this idea of like ego, and being like, no, I've thought that this was fine, but actually having someone else's perspective is so important. Someone that you trust, and I really trust my agent. I think that having that relationship meant that when she said to me that this isn't working, I trusted her to say, I can start again, like, that's okay. And so from between July and September, when we submitted the novel, I wrote furiously. I quit my job and really, I took all the savings I had and I was like, I have enough till September, so this better work out. But I think more so I knew that I really needed to make the space for myself to work and to write, and to think and to feel and to literally get to a desk each day, and show up and really work at and excavating whatever narrative I was trying to do. It was a really intense process. I think that there were a couple of the novel itself is quite heavy and quite emotional in places, and so it was really a task to encourage myself to go towards those places, to in essence like confront the person that I am. And there were definitely a couple of occasions where I wrote most of the novel in the British Library in St Pancras in North London, and I'd get there at 9 at opening time and I'd leave at 6 p.m. and there'd be times where it'd be mid-morning and a librarian would come across to my table and ask me if I was all right, because I just apparently was just looked like I was really going through it. I don't know what I was. I really wish I could see a mirror of what going through it looked like. But I think it really, I don't know, I think writing in general takes a certain kind of emotional bravery, to sit with yourself alone, with the depths of you, with your real thoughts and feelings. And so I applaud everyone who is trying, because I think that the work is in the trying, and the trying can be really difficult sometimes. And I think that's important to acknowledge. The work for me, I'll get onto the process a bit more later, but so much of the work was me asking what a novel could be. I hadn't felt this pull in this way, and I knew that I needed a container for the story that I was trying to tell. And so I kept asking myself, what do you want this work to be like? And it was a multitude of different things. There was a notebook that I'm still writing with, that I sort of took 2 pages and just listed my intentions, and I asked myself, what is it that you're trying to say? What are you trying to express? And I think having that at the top of your process really sets the tone. So much of my work is not full of plot that races, or it's not. It's very much atmosphere and tone, and it's trying to convey a feeling, because I think that I'm always really intrigued with going past this sentence level and asking myself, and usually a reader as well, what are you feeling? What might you be feeling at these various moments? The work was also this, I don't know, it's a love story, but it's also this real expression of love towards the place that I grew up in, Southeast London, which has always really intrigued me, because there's such a large community of diaspora there, and this idea of people leaving their homes to come and make a home elsewhere is really intriguing to me. But it's also, I don't know, it's a love letter to Black expression and its various art forms. And I think that I'll come into engaging with art forms a bit later, but for me, I couldn't have written the novel without the music that has come before me, or the literature that's come before me, or the film and the moving image that's come before me. Open Water was my first novel, but in writing this, I realized that there were just novels and scraps and pieces that were just littering my hard drive, most of which will probably never see the light of day, but nothing's wasted. So much of that work was building blocks to get me where I am now. Okay. I want to talk a bit more about process. I've touched on these things, but for me, it's really, I don't know, it's really something to physically hold my novel, or to see it in a bookshop, or to have someone read your work and for them to say this is how it made you feel. But so much of that feels like a bonus to me. It's a really beautiful bonus, and it's really humbling, but the process of the work is where I take real joy, being able to kind of sit at my desk where I know that I can be these various versions of myself, where I can be really sort of like on it, and I can also like procrastinate like hell, because usually that's what I do. It's just like Google holes for an afternoon. But I also can be like really messy, and I can be an ugly version of myself, and I can be a beautiful version of myself, and more so I can just be honest. It's a space where I know that I can be honest and go as deep as I am willing to allow myself to, which more often than not is as deep as it goes. I don't know, for me it's an opportunity to really say like, this is the person that I am, and this is what I can see, and this is what I can feel, and these are the possibilities that I am exploring. And so often I'm trying to allow both myself and the characters that I am writing like this sense of infinitude. Like, I want people to be able to like explore the lengths and the depths of the world. I often feel like with my work I'm trying to bridge this gap that exists between emotion and expression, and wondering how it might be possible to close that gap, how it might be possible to write a sentence and to have a reader as close as possible to the feeling of that sentence. And more often than not, it's not just one sentence that it takes, it's like a multitude, and wondering how those sentences appear on the page, and also wondering about the content of those sentences. For me, that's where the real joy comes. It's like kind of in asking, like, how do I communicate a feeling? How do I express like what it is that I'm feeling here? What will it take to get there? And then looking at your sentences after the process and realizing that like you probably have missed it. Like, I always know that I have missed it, but I know that each time I try, I'm getting closer and closer and closer. And that for me that's the real journey. It's like, how close do I get to pure expression? I didn't mean to write this in capitals. It feels like I'm shouting, but this like quote from Terence Hayes, who's a really wonderful poet. Nothing more durable than a feeling, comes in the middle of one of his recent poems in a book of sonnets. And I remember reading that and just not forgetting it, like how these feelings that we're trying to express are the things that stay. Like, I love like really beautiful writing, and there are certain writers that I really enjoy for the way that they are able to like frame sentences, but it's always the feeling that holds and remains. And I think that for me is like, yeah, the feelings are the guiding force. They're slippery, they're like very hard to pin down, and often, sometimes like I have times at my desk where I'm just like, this is just futile. Like you're trying to pin something down, which is often just at the edges of your grasp. But again, that's the journey. That's really where the intrigue is for me. My work is very concerned with not being prescriptive, with having a conversation, in essence, whether that's with you as readers, or writers, or with artists who are here or not here. I think that so much of both Open Water and like subsequent works has been asking essentially like how I got here and trying to express that. And so often that's through these various art forms. It's through the work of Zadie Smith and James Baldwin, but also filmmakers like Barry Jenkins and photographers like Roy de Carava, and musicians. Like my work is just like, it's full of music, to the point that often when I'm being edited, they're like, you have to cut some of this down in a way. But I have this real reverence for musicians and for lyricism, and for the ability to, I don't know, like sometimes musicians and poets, I don't know how they do it. Like being able to just like communicate a feeling in a single line, and I'm just there like, I took pages to try and do this. It's really intriguing to me, but writing in conversation, writing towards that, like it creates this like dynamic where like it takes my work at least to another dimension I couldn't have imagined, because in a sense you're you're not only in conversation with whatever work has come before, but you're like a musician might sample a snippet of a track. You're sampling a feeling. You're going towards whatever feeling that musician or artist tried to express. And that relationship there it expands the work, it grows it on the page, or whether it's spoken or on the page, in a way that often I really struggle to fathom, and it's really wonderful to see appear. Yeah, I just said this. Writing, it's just so slippery. It's very like trying to pin down these feelings just often, to me, feels so futile. Like I am just like kind of trying to hang on to like a bar of butter or something like that. And I think that that process of like being and of like taking a real joy from that process, like I don't think that joy is always pleasurable. I think that it like is a real multitude of emotions, and often it can contain like terror. Like I usually get to a blank page because I don't plan anything, and I like have this real panic for about 5 or 10 minutes where I'm just like, I can't write, like I have no idea what to do. But sitting in that space, in that, I don't know, in the unknown, it really, and going towards things that aren't able to be pinned down and trying, that's where the work appears from for me. I think so much of writing in the act and the way it might be received is this real act of faith, like being able to do something that isn't guaranteed is, yeah, that for me is really what faith is, and it's really where my work sits within. Yeah, I don't know, so much of I'm aware, like I've spoken a lot about my process, but I always try and encourage people to ask what their process looks like when are you writing? Like, what are you writing? Like, what does your space look like? What does it feel like? Like, what are you engaging with when you're at your desk? Like, what are you engaging with when you're away from your desk? Do you have snacks? Like, snacks are a big thing for me. Like, I don't know, like, I always have snacks just on hand, because I know that I'm someone who will like be sat down and I'll just kind of just be going and eating and drinking. But small things like that, like understanding like how you can get towards the place where you're like working, where you are able to be comfortable enough to be uncomfortable, where you're able to kind of enter that space where you're working and you're writing, and sometimes not writing. Like so many of my days at the moment I spent like where I should be writing are spent like kind of either going down various like rabbit holes on Google and being really interested in different things and thinking, like, how did that person do this thing? Let me Google this, and let me go down here and let me pull out this book, which might happen. But it doesn't waste time for me. Everything aids the process, even if I don't use what I have spent a day looking at. For me, like it all just feeds into the work and really feeds into you as a person, and you can't work if you're not feeding yourself as a person, which I think is, yeah, like I think so much of like writing really concentrates on it being this very singular act where you sit at your desk and you write 1,000 words and then you go home and then you do it again the next day. And I'm so intrigued in the in-between, like what you're doing on your way to the place that you write, or like what you eat for breakfast, how you eat it for breakfast, like how you spend your spare moments, like what are you drawn towards, what is really intriguing you, like how are you feeding your curiosities. Like I think that I don't know, I'm quite instinct-led, so if something feels like it's resonating with me or something feels like it's touched me, I'll just go towards it. Like I won't ask many questions, and then suddenly will just find myself like in a space where I'm doing something that wasn't in the plans. Last week I was in Vienna, and it's the first sort of like big flight that I've taken in a while, for obvious reasons. And I got off the plane, was standing in passport control, and in front of me were like a couple of my favorite jazz musicians, which completely random, very coincidental. And I spent a few minutes like deliberating in my head. I was just like stood there, like kind of like, should I say hello? Should I not? I don't know. And I went and tapped one of them in the back, and we had this really lovely conversation. And then he was like, "Oh, I'm doing a concert tonight in Vienna. Like, come along." And ended up spending a really wonderful evening with him, whereas I'd planned to just go to the hotel and sleep for 10 hours. But I guess being open to kind of going towards like the unknown, towards like something that like makes you curious is a really big part of the process, I think. You have to be able to take some joy from this work that you do, because writing is really hard. Writing is like really, really hard. I think that when I'm in like really full rhythm and I'm working on a project, be it a short story or an essay or a novel, I always walk away from it just spent. Like I have to spend a couple of hours like almost re-entering the world from this place that I have like carved out for myself in my head. And so it's not easy, and to be able to do that, I don't know, I usually write Mondays to Fridays, so to be able to do that every morning, Monday to Friday, either you have to take some joy from it. It's a certain kind of madness, I think, writing, like just like spending time by yourself. And often, like I write with music on, but there's a very specific sort of quiet that comes when you are just alone, and spending time in that quiet can be really difficult, especially when things emerge that you didn't know were in your depths. But as a process, as a whole, overall, like wanting to go towards it, wanting to say like I am essentially committed to this practice and to growing this practice, I think you have to be kind of intentional with that, because otherwise it gets really hard to convince yourself on the days when it is really difficult. And I think so much for me, like whenever I'm finding myself like wavering a little bit, like I'm always having to ask myself like a few questions, like why am I doing this? Like what is the story that I'm trying to tell? And how can I get there? And it all, like every time I like ask myself those three questions, it always comes back to, why am I doing this? And the answer to that question might change over time, and it might gain something, it might lose something. But I think asking yourself on a regular basis, like why do you feel pulled towards storytelling? Which it's not an easy answer to give, but checking in with yourself is really important. Aside from writing, I journal most days, usually in the evenings, or not like just falling straight asleep. But like a few lines around my practice is really important for me. Like being able to, knowing that I'm always like spending time like in my own mind in a very specific place when I'm writing, because I know that I'm expressing myself, but also the work is coming out of me and might be seen by someone else. Having this space where you can journal and actually no one ever sees it, that's really useful, because you can just like, you could be super messy. You could just be like, okay, like this wasn't working today and it really like frustrated me. It really like, or this is something that I took something from today, or this is how I was feeling. I think having that space is important too. I don't know, like even preparing this speech was really enjoyable. Being able to just be in the process of it, of writing, of trying to express yourself in some way. I don't know. Joy for me is the feeling that I feel when I'm doing this. This idea of intentions that I was speaking about earlier is like usually at the top of the year, or like at a certain point in the year, I will ask myself what it is that like one I'm interested in at the moment, and then also ask myself what it is that I want to write, or what it is that I want to express in a certain period of time. And that list obviously can change, and usually I don't get anywhere near like what I've written down, but having these intentions in a way holds you accountable. It asks you, like, not only does it give you the space to say, this is actually what I want to do, which more often than not, like, people aren't asking you what you want to do, they're saying, can you do this? And so in a way it's like this, that flips that script, that switches and centers the process for yourself, and is actually is a really big part of the process, like saying, what is it that I want to do? Because those questions that question is fueled by all of those other questions, like, what do I feel? What can I see? What do I want to be? Which I think is a big scary question, but often like sitting with yourself and asking, like, where do I want to go is, it's like I don't know, it feels for me like an easy way to dream, and to dream in like the smallest or the biggest of ways. Usually I think I've left it downstairs, but I've got a notebook which I will just do that in, and it will be surrounded by all of my writing work. And so I know that sometimes I'll be like mid-process and I might be struggling, and I'll go back to those original intentions, and I can always, it's mine, so I can just cross it out and be like, let's do this instead. Or we're going towards here. But it's always, for me, like having markers, like having a way to remember, especially in a time where we're often like being like bombarded with a lot of information, and there's lots of like images and news like flying about, like having like this private space for yourself to say, this is who I was at this precise moment, and this is who I am now, and kind of like then reconfiguring or like saying to yourself, keep going, is a very important thing to have. Affording yourself like grace, this is like, I have really had to work on this and say to myself that it's okay not to write every day, or it's okay to not have this sense of perfection. Like often as a writer or as an artist, like you want to do the thing that you're doing well, and actually you like a lot for me, like I'm always having to reframe these ideas of success. And I say this from a position of privilege, because like I have been really fortunate to have my book like do quite well this year. But for me, I'm always asking like, what does success mean to me, and what are the external markers? More so, what are the internal markers? Like how can I get to the end of a particular process and say I've succeeded? And a big part of that success recently has been not being hard on myself and kind of allowing myself the grace to fail and to say, oh, you didn't quite hit the mark there, but like we'll do this next time. Or to reach out and ask for help and ask like, how can I be better? That in itself is a form of grace, like accepting and then wanting to improve. Actually, let me talk a little bit more about like this idea of success, because I think that, like I touched on it earlier when I was talking about writing and actually specifically publishing existing between art and commerce. And there are very traditional markers of success, like sales, prizes, like things that you can hold, things that are shiny, things that are cool. I like shiny things. But also there is this real, for me, like the real joy is in being able to write whenever I want, like in being able to say that this is what I do. And I've been saying that for like 6 years, like even before it was what I did professionally, at least. Being able to really like own the thing that you are engaged with, owning your craft, being able to like hold that in high esteem, and in a sense like be quite reverential of it, I think that's a success. Like, and actually I don't think that is an easy thing to do, to like actually openly express like I write. Like for a lot of people it takes a long time to to get to that space. But you all write, I assume. I want to say that most people in this room are writers or going towards that. If you're writing, you're a writer. I'm going to say that very honestly here. And you should hold on to that because that's yours. No one will take that from you. Community, I think that, we're all, in a way, we're all in community here. Every time that for me, a community can literally be two people having a conversation, over coffee or passing each other on the bus. I've had some of the best conversations with strangers who have just we've noticed something about each other and that's set something off. One of my closest friends is a writer, Raymond Antrobus, he's a poet. And we met at a gig at Roundhouse and I was coming out of the toilet and I was holding a book and Raymond has never spoken to me in his life. And suddenly I felt someone just slap my arm and he was like, I'm reading that book too, really excitedly. And that we've since developed a friendship, but that for me, having this openness, this willingness to to engage in community with people, to be able to be this is something that we might share, or actually just meeting eyes with someone and being there is kinship there. And not just as writers or as artists, but just as people, because that really, that kinship, that community really feeds us. I think holding on to our communities, because so often the work emerges from there, whether, it took me a long time to realize that everything I was writing was about this tiny slice of London that I'd come from. And that everything I was writing was coming through the lens of someone who doesn't see Ghana as home, but sees it as a way of thinking and feeling because it's what I've grown up around. And so the community always makes its way into your work. Allow the space for it to do so. I think that's important. The last thing that I want to say, as well as saying thank you for listening to me, is this quote from Saidiya Hartman, who's a really wonderful academic. And she said that I'm just as committed as I am to expression, as I am to freedom. And I think these last questions I always ask myself, how will you afford yourself freedom? How will you make space? Thank you.
I was just wondering, besides your agent, if you had any particular mentor for creative feedback and criticism or opportunities, things like that, and how did you find them, if so?
No one that was working as a writer. I had lots of friends who would read my work and would give friends I trusted, so they give really honest feedback. And that I guess the reason that I trust my literary agent so much is because we're really close. We've built a friendship, which means that I understand that when she's saying start again, she has my best interests at heart. But I think that, I don't know, trust is such an important part of that. Sometimes it just needs to be someone that you trust. It just needs to be a friend. It doesn't need to be someone that's in the industry as such, because the work that you're doing at first, at least, is to build the craft and to get to a place where you're good with the craft, and then you can sort of think about how to emerge that from you towards a more private space to a public space. But yeah, the short answer is I didn't have any real professional mentorship. My mum, she reads all my work. It's great. But yeah, aside from that.
Just following on from that, and given that your work is such a deep expression of self, I wondered how you found the editorial process.
So I signed my contract on the 1st of October 2019, and I refused to touch the manuscript until January 2020, because I was just I was actually both my UK and my US editor worked on it simultaneously, which was really wonderful to have these two different perspectives, both of which agreed 99% of the time. And when I finally got to it, I realized I'd just been worrying for nothing, because it was like it was a very intimate sort of conversation. It felt like I was like 3 people were sat down talking about how we could excavate this work and make it better. I think that the best editors are ones who are asking you questions rather than saying, do this. It's like, shall we try this, or how might you feel about trying to excavate this? Because I think that it's always, my editor's always asking me, can you go deeper? And often are very receptive when I say, actually, this is the place that I was trying to go, and this is the intention. You want editing to be a conversation as opposed to prescription, I think.
In a similar vein, with the literary agent asking you to write it again, could you say something about are you willing to say something about what the fundamental thing about that was? Was it structure? Was it reader awareness? Because it's so hard to evaluate your own writing. It's really interesting to hear what you missed, if you don't mind me putting it that way.
I used to think that the first draft was more experimental, but I think the book itself now feels more experimental and actually a bit bolder, but I don't think that the spine of the novel was as strong. I don't think that those intentions that I'd had, I don't think they were being communicated as clearly as they could have been. Like, it was more fragmentary, and I think that starting again enabled me to really use this idea of that I mentioned earlier, as love as a site of freedom, as the spine, and have that running all the way through. Like, it was like, okay, this is the intention, this is clear, everything sort of has to run through that, and it might waver and it might go away from it and meander and come back, but that's where the novel had to have a spine, and at the time it was a collection of bones. It wasn't quite there yet.
I just wanted to say it was a delight to me to hear somebody talking so much as you did about the joy, and it's something I have experienced myself and often struggle to get back to. And I sort of wanted to ask an open question, if I may, through yourself, to the audience. And is this something that you all find that you try to reach as writers?
Yes.
And so it's something that a common experience that we've all had in that space. It's when I managed to do it, which isn't often enough, I don't think, but when I manage to do it, it really is, I really get a high from it. Yeah. It's absolutely a buzz. Yeah.
For me, it feels almost like transcendent. Like, there's something that you're touching that just doesn't happen every day. And I think, actually, I was reading part of Miles Davis's autobiography, where he was talking about this period of his life where there were a couple of musicians that he was listening to as a young musician, and he had the opportunity to hear them live, and he was saying the feeling that they managed to capture, the sort of that idea of the high, that transcendence. He said that he'd been chasing it in his own music ever since, and didn't know if he was ever going to get there, but the whole process was trying to touch that place again, where it's all you feel so unencumbered. It's like the walls, the boundaries fall away, and there's a real sense of this expression is very honest and almost pure, whatever that means. Yeah.
Hi, that was really amazing. It's great when you were talking about the idea of getting the emotion first, because you kind of forget that, and especially when you're in a university setting, you're sat there going, what messages are here, rather than how do I actually read this as a human being. I was wondering if you had any advice about querying agents, because it doesn't seem to matter how many kind of examples I read, I still feel in Morse code somewhere it's secretly written that I hate my work, and they can see that I hate it. So how do you communicate that I value my work, and I think this is why you should value it as well?
I think 2 things, and it's going to sound really useless or wishy-washy, but finding the right person. So often in the first bit of time that I was querying, I was just querying agents, and then I would start to look at their lists and their taste, and I would start to like wonder whether either we had similar taste or whether I would fit into their list, and whether the work that they were representing was aligning with my own or my own ideas. Because enough, like my agent represents like just like a like real wide range of writers, but there is clearly something that we share in the way that we're trying to express. And so I think that's a big thing. And then in the actual process of querying, you have to be willing to say that like your work is the thing. Like to be able to be like, this is like I really love like both my work and what I do, because it is something that you can feel. And actually championing yourself takes a certain kind of bravery, but it's a big thing. Like I think that at the time where I submitted to my agent, I was just so sure. Like I really was like, oh, this is the work, this is the place that I want to be operating in. And I think like trying to communicate is really difficult, but in a sense like saying that this is where I'm at and actually also this is where I want to go is really important, because when you get to your agent, it's not just going to be, okay, well, we're here now. It's like you want to cultivate this space where you can just continue to grow and develop your craft.
I really enjoyed listening to you, and I'm conscious that writers come at things from different places, and feel like my journey is completely different to your own. So I read lots of it resonated, you know. But I sort of woke up with a plot idea in my head, and I've written this novel that I love the plot of. But I loved what you said about before you write, sort of giving yourself a subheading of what am I trying to express. And I didn't do that, you know, before writing. But I'm wondering if, you know, can you do that if you're dealing with something that's really plot-driven, which is quite different to perhaps how you approach writing? Is it still possible to start with what is it I'm trying to express? What do you think?
For sure, because I think that's basically what editing is. Like you kind of you have this work and you're trying to get it to the place where you're pleased with it. That's what the work of and what editing and an editor does. I think also if you've been like occupied with the space of plot, then if you have that sort of that list of intentions or those things that you want to say, then maybe ask like, how are your characters able to do this? Because so much of the expression is through character and how they react to the plot, like how they react to things happening around them. And I think for me, I'm always wondering, like I'm always wondering like what are my characters doing and why they're doing it, and that can be where the expression emerges.
Because I just wanted to say that I actually loved Open Water, and I just loved the way you write about love in London. It just felt like a poem. It was beautiful. But I want to ask you about studying writing and what you got out of studying writing at the university level.
I didn't study writing at university level. I think that a lot of my study has been very like self-led. So like, I didn't study writing, but I spent a lot of time like just kind of being like watching stuff on YouTube, listening to writers like talk about their craft and their work, but also like the other interests as well, because that really feeds into it. And just reading as much as possible, like finding out what I enjoyed and what resonates with me and what doesn't. I think in the period of the pandemic, I've definitely been less willing to read like 100 pages or something and put it down. Like I will read like 50 and be like, okay, well, this isn't quite working for me, and that's okay, because it might work for someone else. But just trying to work through that, like work out like your interests, like work out what you're in conversation with, and allowing like everything around you to feed into your work. I think that's really been, in terms of like studying, that for me feels like the process that's still ongoing.
I just wanted to ask about the split that you mentioned between writing and art and commerce, and how you make sure that more experimental parts of your writing aren't kind of smoothed over in favour of marketability or stuff like that.
I don't know, I feel like I feel like my work has like certain pillars. So like I know that my work always starts with the feeling and then it's the character. And I think kind of like, this might sound bad, but like actually asking like what it is that you're trying to do and whether it is worth the sacrifice. 99.9% it's always a no. It's just like, I think that being so much of like what I do emerges from being really stubborn and being like, this way of expression, like I think this is the way that the feeling is going to be communicated. And trying to give readers like something more than the sentence, trying to like say that if you are like here for a page, this is what you're going to feel, like really trying to like immerse someone into the work. It's how it has worked for me. But I think it is very much like a thing of like saying to yourself, like if this is the mode of expression that you're choosing, like doing it wholeheartedly and being like allowing yourself to be both very sure but also uncertain, because the like really incredible things emerge when you are like uncertain and then lean into that. So leaning into the unknown, I think, is important.
You mentioned that you'd had sort of 40 odd rejections before your success in finding an agent.
Yeah.
I'm still at the stage of having rejections and I still haven't found an agent, and I got to the stage where I gave up and started to approach publishers direct. Did you try that as well or not?
I did a couple of times.
Yeah. I found that I've done that with half a dozen now, and I found that the feedback I'm getting is, I guess I don't know, they've got more time to do it or something. I don't know, or maybe my work that I've been submitting has been getting better. I don't know. That's one of the things that I struggle with. But I found in general the agents, and I assume it's just because they're so busy, much less open to giving rejections with decent feedback. The publishers that half a dozen I've approached, 3 of them have given me really good feedback that I found immensely useful. You know, they've said, yeah, we like that, but it's not quite right because of A, B and C. And so I thought, okay, I can work with that. So I would recommend that anybody, from my own experience, everyone's different of course, but if you're like me, not getting any joy from agents, try going directly to publishers.
I'd say, yeah, the agent thing is really difficult because I know that agents get like X amount of queries and manuscripts, and yeah, just like, I don't know how my agent reads everything. Like it's really quite difficult, and I think having people around you that will give you feedback before you get to that stage is really important, because it's really difficult to rely on strangers who, though they are working in the industry, are still strangers to you, to like give you feedback and also to be honest about it. So I'd always say first and foremost, like just have those people around you that you're like, these guys, I trust their opinion. And then also asking, the most difficult thing is asking yourself like about the work and really trying to like afford yourself some space and time so that you can come back to the work with perspective.
For sure. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caleb.
Thank you.